How's it going, guys? Today we're going to be building the wall divider to separate the front from the back. So I've gone out and bought a couple lengths of 30 by 42mm pine, and we're going to be building a framework which we can then insulate and clad. Now my main purpose for doing this is that I want to keep my driving and living space separate, add an extra layer of sound deadening and insulation from all the windows at the front, and also box in the back space so we have a little bit more privacy from the outside world. My requirements for this are pretty simple. I want a sturdy wall for me to build some of my cabinetry onto, as well as having a little flap here that comes down so I can still use my reversing mirror while driving the van. There's not really too much more to say on that, so let's get into it. So for my divider wall, this is the rough plan that I've sketched out, with 4 main upward supporting beams, my little flap in the middle, and then a couple of horizontal beams to make it stronger. So I've now cut out the main pieces that are going to make up that wall. However, before I fix any of it together, I'm going to be using my mirror as a reference for where I want these middle beams to be. So for my mirror, I'm going to be adjusting my eyesight so I can't see either of these middle pieces, and that's going to be a good reference for where I should be building my vision flap. I've now worked out the measurements for the rest of these pieces. Here's my cutting list. Let's get the rest of that done. Here are all my pieces cut, so I'm going to dry assemble that, see how that looks, and then knock it all together. We've now got the wall frame dry assembled, and I'm happy with how that's looking. So it's time to pull it apart and get some screws in it. I'm just going to be sticking some bugles through all the ends to pull it together tightly. This wall is now all knocked together and ready to go. So to fix it into the van, I'm going to be using screws in the top and bottom, and for the sides, I'm going to be bolting it directly into the van panel. So to install those bolts, I've gone out and bought a Riv-Nut set. Installing the Riv-Nut is actually pretty simple. I've selected an M5 Riv-Nut, so just need to put on the M5 end piece and middle piece. The middle piece feeds through the back, like so, and then you screw the Riv-Nut onto the end until it sits flush with the front. So now that's all tight. Once I install the Riv-Nut in the hole, I just squeeze the trigger. That expands the Riv-Nut, and then I've got a threadable bolt inside the van cavity. So if you see that hole there, just install it inside there flush. And now you don't want to hear it pop like you would a normal root gun. You just want to squeeze until it's nice and tight, and then you get it out by twisting the thread out through the back of this. So now that is nice and tight in there, and I've got a thread to install my bolts. I'll be doing that same process on the other side of the van, and then we can get that wall installed. Alrighty, let's get that wall up. So I have to adjust that a little bit to make sure it's all square and straight, but there we go, we have a wall. I'm happy with that location now, so we're going to be putting some 50mm timber screws through the ceiling and the floor to hold it tight there, and then we'll also be getting those bolts in. So now that we have our wall frame up and fixed in, the next step is going to be to insulate and clad it. The process for this is going to be much the same as we've done with our other walls. We're going to be stuffing sheets of Earthwool in between the cavity and then lining each side with some pine lining board. I'm going to start by lining out the front side, which is hardest to get to, and then we'll come through and do the back side at the end. I now have all of the lining boards up to the level I want at the front. The rest of it's going to be mostly covered, so I'll be using plywood to do the bottom section. Now, while I was working on this, I realized I had to cover up this section here. So I also threw together this rough little piece here out of an offcut, which has a little bit of insulation behind it and just boxes that in nicely. This is also going to be painted white when I do the wall. It is clearly another day, but continuing on from yesterday, I've also added another little support on the wall here, just so my cladding can be nice and stable up on the ends. Now today we're going to be following that same process we did on the front for the back. So we've got the rest of my boards down here. We're going to start cutting them out, but I want to show you how I've been doing these detailed notches on here to get those lines looking nice. So up here you can see the piece that we're going to be installing has to taper off to the right a little bit. The absolute easiest way to get that marked is going to be with a contour gauge. Keep that up there flat, make sure it's straight. And then I'm just running with that line until I reach the bottom of where my board has to be. And now I'll show you how easy it is to mark it on the piece. I've got my next lining board here. So I'm just lining the bottom of the contour gauge flat with my piece, and then we'll just trace that line. And now that we have that all marked, I'm just using a jigsaw to easily cut that out. So here we've got my piece notched out and dry fitted in. That's how easy it is to get a nice tight line when you're joining your boards up. All right, time to start screwing it in. I'm gonna be insulating as I go, so we're gonna get our first 2 boards on and then stuff the insulation up behind it. I've now got this detailed piece cut out for above the peephole, but at this time, we're also getting to the height where I'm gonna want my light switch to live. So before I fix this one off, I'm gonna have to mark the position I want my light switch to be and cut a hole for that. And then we can continue on with our cladding. So I want that light switch to be comfortable to turn on as I'm walking into the van, as well as just general use throughout the day. I think around about here is gonna be perfect. It's not too high from the ground, but it's also not too awkwardly low as I'm inside the van. All right, so I've got my position marked here. I'm just gonna be using a hole saw straight down the middle of that. Test that. I've got another one of my light switches here. Yeah, that's gonna be perfect. There we go, that's my light switch all installed. It's pretty effective. Time to continue with the rest of the paneling. Continuing on with the bottom parts of the walls, I've gone ahead and bought the plywood which we'll be using to seal in those sides. So first things first, I'm going to get all of those shapes cut out and then we can insulate the walls and throw the door cards out. So now we begin the long and arduous process of filling all the screw holes. Now that we have all these screw holes filled in and the walls sanded, the final step is going to be to apply a nice coat of white paint to all of these walls. For the paint, I've chosen British Paint's Paint and Prime in a white. This will be super easy to apply to the raw timber that we'll be using for our furniture. It's also a super durable paint and can be scrubbed clean when the white walls of the van inevitably get dirty. To apply this, we'll be using a medium-sized roller with a 4mm nap. Now that we have our wall divider all framed out and painted, I want to be focusing on the little visibility flap in the middle. So I've gone ahead to cut out and stain a little frame for that wall just to seal it all in and make it look finished. We'll be attaching that now, and then we focus on finishing off the actual flap mechanism. So this is pretty annoying. As I was screwing in that top plate, it has unfortunately split in half. Hooray! I've already gone to all the effort of staining it and finishing it, so I might have a go at just gluing it back together with wood glue, and hopefully it doesn't look too bad. The only reason this happened is because it's a thin bit of wood and I was lazy and didn't pre-drill it. It's just an example of where being lazy can cost you. So let's start pre-drilling. The frame's now installed and we'll end up filling all these screw holes with a little bit of putty just to finish it off. I'm not totally happy with how this has come out. There's a few issues. My cuts weren't quite straight enough, so you can see little gaps around the place. Obviously, my top piece split from the screw, which is absolutely doing my head in. I'm going to leave this here for now as it's still functional, gets the idea across, and I want to continue on working with the flap. However, I'm definitely going to come back and redo this at a later date. At the very least, that top panel is split. So let's crack on. This is the rough design for the flap that we're going to be installing. However, the final product is going to be a lot more decorative. I need to install this front plate in the right position, and then we can look at how well it folds with the hinges. So inside of here, we've got my front plate, and the main frame is going to be the support for the flap. We now have the front plate installed and it's all swinging quite smoothly. So now we can go ahead and put the back plate on. We'll be using 2 screws to hold the back plate in place and then properly fixing it with the brad nails. There's the frame for the divider, so now we just have to install it. And there we go, there's a little panel for my wall divider. Now I'm waiting on some rattan webbing to get here because we're going to do a decorative front and back panel just to finish this all off, but practically that is all working quite nicely. I'll see you when the mail gets here. So now that we've got the little flap working functionally, it's time to take it off and make it look a little bit more decorative. So I've got my front plate marked out here, and we've just gone 4 centimeters in from every edge. I'm going to cut out the middle, and then that's going to reveal the rattan webbing behind it. There's our front plate. So now that it's painted and we've created our front plate, it's time to do the decorative step, which is going to be installing some rattan webbing. We'll be applying the rattan webbing with a staple gun and then locking it all in with that front plate. Super easy job, but it comes out looking fantastic. So now to attach these front pieces, I'm just going to be gluing the back sides as well as attaching some bullet head nails just to hold it in place until the glue sets. And they're a small enough size that hopefully they won't be too obvious and ugly while they're up there. If you found this video useful, leave a like to show your support for the channel. If you have anything you want me to clarify further or just want to chat van builds in general, drop a comment down below and we can do that there. And subscribe to follow along with the rest of my van build. Thanks guys.